for charity. All right, let me introduce our wonderful speakers. I am going to start with Laura, if she's still here, so we don't lose her. So Laura did our course, I'm not sure, 2 years ago, maybe, right at the beginning, when it was a very different iteration to what it is now. But Laura wears many different hats. She actually started off as an angel investor and has now moved on over to the other side. She founded a business called SEEP, which she'll tell you a bit more about in a minute, but she has raised debt funding. She has recently raised a round of angel funding, and it's a really interesting story behind why she chose those options. Do you want to share a bit more about yourself and your funding journey, Laura?
Yes, I think you've covered the key bits, but yeah, sort of 20 years in consumer and retail industry. Never thought I'd be a founder, but then just came up with the idea of SEEP, which was, so the idea is lots of people have switched to eco cleaning fluids and laundry, but actually they're still using a sort of plastic-based cleaning accessories like sponges and polyester cloths. And so had the idea for ages, and then just thought, gosh, if someone else does this idea, I'll just regret it forever. So took the plunge, bootstrapped. Yes, did your course very early on, and I think we've on top of debt and equity, we've also had a bit of grant funding as well. So we've definitely been kind of pulling in from all different sources.
Wonderful. And how was that sort of journey for you?
I think it's really challenging, especially if you've never really gone out and fundraised, and and I'm a sole founder, I don't have co-founder, and so I think that's probably one of the hardest things, and I think it should probably determine your fundraising strategy. So if you're a sole founder, you have to try and run the business while fundraising. And so I've just finished a round of our seed investment round, and I think it's taken me 6 to 9 months, and it's taken 70% of my time. And so that's pretty brutal to do that whilst keeping your business going. And so I think if I could see another way through it, I probably would have chosen not to do it. But I think for us, it was the only, if I really wanted to scale and do the next level of growth, my view was that it had to be really equity to raise the kind of money that I wanted. So, I think this, especially the last 6-9 months for most people out there, has probably been really, really tough, against a kind of fairly tough business climate as well, not just investment climate.
Yeah. What we like to do here is try and be as honest as we can. So Laura is doing that. That's what we do here. Blunt and honest, and that's the reality. 6 to 9 months to raise your first round of equity funding from angels, to be specific, takes that long, and it's particularly challenging right now in the particular climate.
It's brutal. Yeah, it's brutal, and I'd say I went to funds as well as angels, and it's a really tough, and I think you tend to see things on LinkedIn that, all these people have raised their investment round. What you don't often see is they've been raising for a year or 18 months. They've had 300 conversations, of which 280 have been no's, so I think you just have to be really honest. I think there needs to be more honesty in this sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Amy's saying in the chat, keeping the business growing, while also fundraising, exactly where we're at. I feel your pain. I'm sure a lot of people in this room also feel your pain, but actually, well done for sort of getting to the end and managing.
So did you take the nail clipper? Oh no, it's okay, I found it.
Oh, is that a question, John? Maybe I'll put you on mute.
Oh no, sorry, I should be on mute. My apologies.
It's okay, it's all right, I'll put you on mute. Just checking I wasn't missing a question. All right, well, we will ask, I'm sure that there'll be more questions around angel funding, and also, do you want to speak about your Corallis loan? I know that Maya is also involved in Corallis.
Yeah, I'd say that your newsletter, I think, is, if you haven't signed up to your newsletter, Esme, massive plug from me. I just think it's a really, really good summary of all of the alternative funding instruments out there. So I think Corallis came up. I would never have seen it. And it's basically a kind of global network of mostly women. So in the UK, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, so not really global, but it's an amazing community so funded by women, for women and non-binary folks, and they all vote. It's a relatively long, drawn-out process, but at the end of it, you get an interest-free loan on fairly flexible terms. And for anyone who's trying to get loans out there, they're typically not like that. They're really quite expensive at the moment. So, I think we've, your email, and there's a few others, I've applied for, and it makes a real difference. It takes the pressure off a little bit.
Thank you. And I promise Laura was not paid to talk about when so we'll talk more about debt in a minute, and maybe I'll ask Maya to talk about Coriolis a bit more. But let's go to Dominic. So introducing wonderful Dominic, who's the founder of Stay Nimble. He joined our cohort in May, I think. It's just hard to keep track. And I remember when you joined and you did this wonderful introduction, and I was like, yes, this is a person who gets what we're saying here. So Dominic has raised, I think, almost 2 million in grant funding, and you did a crowd equity campaign. You did this a couple of years ago, 2018, and then I've sort of focused on revenue until now. Do you want to talk a bit more about you and your funding journey?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Dom. I founded Stay Nimble in 2018. We're a for-profit social enterprise, which is where the wonky shape sometimes can come into the conversation through an amended Articles of Association. Anyone's interested about how to embed purpose really in the depths of their organization, happy to talk about that at length. We've supported about 14,000 people now across the UK to kind of take control of their working lives as they change in their lives and the world around them changes. And we do that through a career development program, platform that we've built that also provides access to dedicated one-to-one personalized coaching from qualified career coaches using the register from the Career Development Institute, which is the only professional body in the UK that oversees quality standards and ethics in career guidance and counselling. So essentially, we've been kind of aggregating all that expertise into a platform that people can access in a kind of always on fashion. And so we started in 2018, bootstrapped for the first year, and then worked through to a crowdfunding equity raise, which closed in 2019. And then since then have been securing grants and contracts through and developing the business through revenue. We've fundamentally been trying to show that technology companies don't always have to focus on high growth and want to try and demonstrate that when you embed purpose in your organization, it leads to better outcomes for society generally. And I guess in the time that we've been running over the course of the last five and a half years, we've managed to have a couple of profitable years, which has helped us in many respects to continue conversations as relates to future raising. The challenge is exactly as Laura just said. It's really difficult raising equity at the moment. And we're just not in a phase where we're really focusing on raising the stage. We're still able to really run the business effectively on a smaller headcount than we probably had 2 years ago. And as a result of that, still securing grants. We've worked with Nesta, for example, and a bunch of corporate citizenship teams as well in different organizations that our business really aligns very clearly with some of the things they're trying to do. So yeah, that's generally the journey that we've had, really a bit of early equity crowdfunding, which I can talk about the rationale about why we decided to go down that route, and then really the fortuitous nature of some of the things that happened along the way as a result of that, which tends to be this kind of serendipity sometimes that comes about where you turn up to places and you meet the right people.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, if anybody is looking at equity crowdfunding or is interested in grants, please put it in the chat. It will help us shape this session and focus it on things that you're interested in. I think you said some really interesting things there, Dominic. You know, you are a tech business and are theoretically very scalable. You could be in a huge market. You could end up going down that VC route, but you've made a very conscious decision to focus on your purpose, and that has closed some doors to some funding, but potentially opened up other doors that maybe suit you better. Can you talk a bit more about your equity crowdfunding campaign and why you decided to go down that route first?
Yeah, so this was kind of mid 2018, and we knew that we were onto something. We'd built this very rough and ready prototype, and we were beginning to see that there was something there. But obviously, it was incredibly small numbers. And so when we were having conversations with different angels for putting together a seed round, we just didn't have the business traction to really get people confident about moving forward on that basis. The thing that was interesting to me about crowdfunding was I could really get my friends and family to invest in small numbers, and that would get me some money that would get us closer to an amount, right? And then I realized that actually it was a really great way of starting to build the brand by trying to get several hundred people investing in the company would help us to be able to run decent referrals and get all those people using the platform and telling other people about it. And so those were the kind of key things that I was thinking about when trying to figure out, you know, how to raise that first bit of money that we wanted to be able to really make the technology a little bit more mature than this, you know, very rough and ready prototype that we built in my bedroom.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting, right? That logic behind why crowdfunding versus something else. There's always pros and cons of each of these options, and you need to think about which one might be right for you. Like in your case, it was a way to, you know, create an opportunity to talk about what you're doing, build your brand, share it, but also bring in some family members to be, or friends and family to be co-owners in your business and benefit from, you know, potential sale of the business, and also make it cheaper to get money from them. I get a lot of people who are asking me like, oh, I've got, you know, some friends and family, he might be able to give me £100, £500 towards my business, but the legal cost of actually putting that together can be a lot. So you can't just raise around on that.
Right. And we didn't want a really messy cap table either of like lots of individual investors on it. It makes it really difficult if in the future we are getting to a place where we're talking to funds about what we're doing and they don't, having a complicated, messy cap table is one of the things that I wanted to avoid. And so one of the benefits of using one of the crowdfunding platforms was that they structure that in the nominee structure that sits on the cap table as the shareholder, as opposed to, you know, the 250 people who invested in the company.
Yeah. Can you just explain what a cap table is? Because I know that we can all fall into some investment lingo, and perhaps it's useful just to define those things for everyone.
Yeah, it's essentially just where the ownership of the company lays. So how many shares are owned by who, and at what price, and usually some kind of preference that sits within that, depending on the types of rounds that you've gone through in the past.
All right, so so far we've got founders that have raised from angels, from a crowdfunding campaign, lots of grants going on, we've got a loan. What kind of questions do you have around exploring these options or thinking about when is a good time to raise? We're going to go to Hermione, to last but definitely not least, and then we will open up to questions. So please get them ready. If you are like me and you often forget your questions, you can put them in the chat, or you will start a queue. Hermione. So Hermione joined our last cohort. I think Hermione has been running her business longer than the other two founders. She did a small equity crowdfunding campaign, and got some grants, and also joined an accelerator program, and has just bootstrapped from that point for years, focused on revenue, has got a really brilliant business, donation. I'll put a link in the chat, and is now sort of raising a next sort of equity crowdfund using a model called Equity for Good, which I will let you share. And it's raising $1 million using that model. So there's some interesting things going on here. Hermione, do you want to talk about that a bit more?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the intro, and also I have so many things to come back on with Laura and Dominic and what you said, and so much I agree with. But as for our journey, well, what donation is, to start with, we use the power of community to make net zero possible. Our kind of founding belief is that motivated and informed people, really it's all about people, are the key to unblocking progress on sustainability and net zero. And we're trying to bring communities together to kind of really galvanize their people to take meaningful action on climate change. That's mostly workplace communities. It is a B2B software as a service tech platform. So like Dominic had some of the challenges and opportunities that being a tech platform creates when it comes to funding. And yeah, as Esme says, I've been running it for quite a long time. Started in 2010. Originally as a pure social enterprise, non-profit really. We were set up as a company as limited by guarantee when I first set it up, thinking that we may even become a charity. At that point, we weren't working with businesses. It was a platform much like Just Giving that anyone could use to raise support for their own challenges, whether it be marathons or birthdays, or I'd cycled to Morocco, and that's where the idea had come from. But rather than asking for cash, you ask for action. Because our belief is actually the environment needs people's action more than it needs their cash. And so because we weren't asking for money, we were asking for action. It made, well, we might as well be a charity. And we were grant funded, and it was a really innovative idea that no one else was doing. And we were able to secure quite a few grants to get the idea off the ground and pilot it. And from Nesta, from Unlimited, from a few different foundations. But actually that over time, I began to find really challenging and limited, because getting any grant that was more than about 20K was very tough, especially as a first-time founder. I didn't have I think the charities that are able to land big grants often have big celebrities behind them, or we weren't. And so I was having to jump from kind of project to project, which didn't seem sustainable. Realizing that actually when it came to funding technology, equity was a much more effective way. It just kind of allows for the risk involved. And equity funders seem to understand technology better. So we restructured as a company limited by shares, and we got accepted onto an accelerator program, Wire Unlimited, which at the time was a tech and social impact kind of accelerator. Really fitted what we were all about. Off the back of that was in 2012. We then piloted working with businesses. That was when we shifted to actually having our own revenue generation, quite a clear business model, helping businesses to engage their employees in climate action. And at that point, we also went down the crowdfunding route. I think for us, the reasons probably largely quite similar to what Dominic outlined, but also actually the donation model is very similar to crowdfunding. It's, people can create a campaign and go out there to all of their people, their supporters, and ask them to make pledges of support. So the skills that we would learn and refine and hone through running a crowdfunding campaign, we could really apply to our own products and service, and vice versa. So it felt really appropriate for us back then. We raised 167,000 in crowdfunding equity, sadly before they had the nominee structure, so our cap table is really messy. And I can talk about the pros and cons of that, but maybe can come back to that. A year or so later, we went out to look to kind of raise another round through early stage VCs. We weren't really ready. We got the same feedback, really informative process, learned a lot, put a lot of time into it, but essentially we're told, go back, automate some processes and come back and talk to us in 6-12 months when you've done that. So we stripped back to a team of 2, started to do that. And actually in automating it, we started to generate enough revenue to just keep the wheels oiled. I wasn't really taking much or any salary at that point, really minimal, and it was very tough. But we really bootstrapped basically, and I started to work part-time on the side, and we just kept the thing alive and bootstrapped for quite a few years that way, until in 2018-19, sorry, I'm really giving you the full detail here, that the market finally arrived. Greta Thunberg hit the streets, Extinction Rebellion came out, the world woke up to the need for climate action, and suddenly we had corporates like Network Rail and Pret a Manger and Siemens knocking at our door without hardly any output from us. So we were then able to grow organically, gradually, very slowly, and actually took on a couple of loans, again interest-free, one from a shareholder who, you know, could see that we were getting revenue in, and was happy to give us a bit of a bridging loan, and then also during COVID, the bounce back loan, government bounce back loan. Those two things really actually probably enabled us to get to the next point, where then we won some huge partnerships and some big sales, working with clients like Bloomberg and PwC, and ran programs with the Earthshot Prize and UEFA and the EU. So 2020, 2021 were huge for us, and we grew from 1.5 to 19 people in the space of just over a year, with organic growth, which was amazing and I was satisfying and I was so proud of, but I was also broken by. And actually the reality was I was never able to think beyond the next client and their needs, and we were jumping from customer to customer, and I was desperate to think about our long-term strategy. That I knew there were places we really need to develop our product, but we were just kind of jumping from customer to customer. Meanwhile, our competitors were raising VC funding and growing faster, and actually one of those big customers, I can talk about all of that. We had a tough year last year. The EU contract came to an end. We had to downsize back down to 10 people. That comes with some kind of repercussions in culture, that it takes a lot of time and energy to make sure everyone's happy, and restructuring the team. We're now back in a solid place in that sense, and we've got made space. I've made space. I'm where, Laura, I guess hopefully in a month or two I'll be where you are now. I'm about 7 months in to having made space to put about 70% of my time into fundraising. Recently probably 70%, but for a large part of that time probably 30-40%, and a raising a round of equity from angels. As you say, as me, we're actually, having gone on the alternative funding school at the end of last year, really clarified for me. There's some models in there that I think are really fascinating and I'd love to go down, but perhaps aren't quite right for us right now, given we are fundraising and we need to move fast, and we've got equity investment set up already. So we're going down the angel equity route, but to make sure that the purpose is really embedded in it, are asking all of our investors to sign the Equity for Good pledge, which I learned about thanks to the course. Have been pioneered by Toast Ale, who are a brilliant company. If any of you don't know them, A, look them up because they're an awesome company. B, they make really nice beer. And they raised equity, asking all of their investors to sign this pledge. Essentially, their realization was, hang on a minute, as a business, we're doing everything to minimize our environmental impact. We're purpose driven to the core. 50% of their profits go towards food waste charities. They're really thorough on that. But if they're then raising investment and their investors make 50, even 10 times, 5 times return, whatever returns they make, if they then go and invest that in Shell or Monsanto, then actually the net impact of their business, despite everything they've done, is negative on the world. And so they asked their investors to sign a pledge to say all of the capital gains that you get out of your investment, you will reinvest into social or environmental businesses or projects. So we're taking that on. We made a slight adaptation to say you can also reinvest that money into personal projects. So if you want to do a green home renovation, or put solar panels on, or go and do a sustainable business MBA, you can put it towards that as well. That's much more in line with what we do at Do Nation. People are making pledges to reduce their footprint in their lives, so it kind of adapts it for our business. Talking to my team about this, they're suddenly really excited because they go, oh wow, okay, so if we do really well, And we're rather than making money for the MAU, we're actually making money for the impact. Well, and that's going to have a legacy for other cool environmental businesses. So yeah, that's where we are at the moment. We're trying to raise 1 million. We've set a minimum of 600k. We've got 360 so far, so we're partway there, but over 60% of the way there. Some of it we're raising through an ASA, Advanced Subscription Agreement, which I can talk more about, using seed legals, which is a way to make it, I've discovered in the last few months, makes the fundraising way less painful. And yes, sorry, I've really gone on.
No, you absolutely have not gone on. I have been attempting to put links in the chat when you mention things, including donation, and other people are also helping me. So we've got links to the Equity for Good. If anyone is interested in that concept, I'd recommend giving it a read. This is sort of what we mean by alternative funding. It's really just finding a route that suits you, that might just be a little bit different, but as it does for Hermione, actually fits your business really well as a donation business, which I think is such a nice fit there. I mean, you talked about so much there. Thank you for your honesty, right, around how grueling this journey is. I'm sure you could all, you're all having your own personal experiences around funding, but you're certainly not alone. It's a slog. But I think what stood out for me in that story is also being there at the right time, right? You were really well positioned, Hermione, to capture that moment in time where you could get all those partnerships, grow really, really fast, because you were ready. And sometimes until your particular market or moment is there, you've just got to stay in the game. And that can be, grants, that can be thinking about new revenue opportunities, to stay in the game and iterate and play until you're at a point where the market's there or you're ready. And now Hermione is in a position where she can devote 70% to raising, £1 million in equity funding, but it does take that sometimes, and particularly to find that time that you need. So yeah, thank you. All right, so all right, so, I mean, I've got about 1 million questions, but I will start with questions that are coming from all of you. As I said, if you just want to ask a question directly, you can just raise your virtual hand and I will try and find you. But I'm going to start in the chat. If you are directing your question specifically to one of the panelists, please just say, or I will see if it naturally fits to a particular panelist, or open it up and any or all of you can answer it. All right, so we're going to start with Ishtar. I'd welcome any resources, tips about the legal and financial structuring for a for-profit social enterprise. Dom mentioned, for example, amending articles of incorporation, and any insights about how this varies depending on where the company is registered geographically. I'm not sure we can comment geographically, but perhaps people can throw in their ideas. But Dom, you can certainly talk about what you've done.
So we decided to take this idea of tech for good to a different level of really trying to make the company tech for good. So not just building technology that does good things and supports people in society for all the things we're doing, of this idea of, the mission being helping everybody to thrive in the work that they do throughout their lives, right? How do you help people navigate change? How do we do that whilst also trying to really make a technology company that is for good? And so what I didn't want to do is shut the door to any future equity by going down the route of just building a charity. So we originally kind of thought the idea, let's make a charity, right? We're going to find a way of being able to build this platform and do lots of really good work for lots of people who struggle to access the expertise and information and knowledge that sometimes gets locked up. And realized through lots of discussion with people who are running charities in the education space that it's really, really hard. And trying to get enough money together to really make that effective was going to be tricky. So I kind of decided to find a way of getting the blend between the two, and I was really lucky at the time because I'd kind of started chatting to the team at Unlimited and Bates Wells, who do a lot of work with social entrepreneurs from a legal perspective, and they had just been creating this tool that was called Purposely, and it's still available. It was a beta program that was running at the time, and essentially it was an easier way of being able to embed the purpose of your company into your organization. This was all facilitated through Social Enterprise UK, because I was like, I contacted them and wanted to know, I want to do this thing. I want to be a social enterprise, but I want to be a for-profit social enterprise. And they were like, oh, that's weird. But said, actually, we've been doing lots of this stuff that will help you with that. And so essentially what the tool allowed me to do was to commit the profit redistribution. It allowed us to insert an asset lock. It allowed us to make the primary object of the business its social purpose, and the secondary focus is delivering shareholder value. And all of those things were all about trying to create this balance, really, of an organization that was not just about delivering profitability for shareholders, but actually its primary reason for being was to support society through transition and change as it relates to work. So that's what we did, and it was a really straightforward process. There was a legal review as all part of that, and it was really great. And we still use Seed Legals as our legal platform now. But when we came to do our equity crowdfunding raise, it was the first time that they'd seen these types of amended articles of association. They hadn't really seen that before. And that created a lot of thoughts about what that meant as we were coming to close the round, and there were lots of things that needed to be worked through. So always take decent legal advice. Bates Wells were really helpful at the front of the process. Seed Legals, when we were doing the crowdfunding raise, it was in the end of 2018, 2019, beginning of 2019. And Seed Legals had only just started. And so I was really lucky to be able to work with, the founding members of the Seed Legal team to help me work through how this was all going to work. So a little bit like Hermione, really. It's a little bit, like I said at the top, sometimes you just get yourself into a place where you're able to be in a place of serendipity that gives you the things that you need at that time. And I struggled a lot with social anxiety throughout my life, and lots of things would preclude me from going out and talking to people because I just get despondent and didn't want to do it. And really had to kind of deal with that during the early part of the company being formed, because I didn't have any of the network or connections to be able to make any of this work. And was really lucky that I just kept turning up to events and talking to people about what I was doing. And as a result of that, I did start to build a bit of a connection and network of people who would be able to introduce me to someone else, who would be able to introduce me to someone else. And it made a big difference. So yeah, that's what we did. We still have, and in many respects, it really helped us with what happened next with regards to grant funding, because it meant that we were able to take part in organizations who were looking to, provide grant prizes for companies like us. And in some respects, that also made it quite interesting to them, because it kind of de-risked a lot of what they were trying to do, because we had other revenue streams coming in at the same time as well. So we could really show that, we weren't just dependent on a pot that we were getting from a corporate citizenship team at one of the, professional services organizations. It was more like, we were able to really demonstrate that we were really walking what we were talking about. And most organizations who have corporate citizenship kind of funding streams don't often work with social enterprises, and we've been able to convince organizations that they should do that, and they've changed their policies to not just be funding charities, but also working with organizations like us, who are there to further the purpose of business, as well as the actual goal that we have of supporting people navigate change in their careers.
No, thank you for sharing. Like definitely a theme between all three of you is not accepting the norm, right? You're like, no, like I'm not a charity, but I'm not all the way over here, like a VC style scalable business, but like we legitimately sit in this middle point. We are for profit, but we are for purpose. Accept us and figure out how we can grow. That's brilliant. And certainly I put it in purposely into the chats, but there are lots of things that you can do that embeds your mission and your purpose into the DNA of your business. So you're not just tracking impact metrics, you're putting it within your articles of association, and you've got things like steward ownership, different governance models that really embed what you're doing, so that you're not just, your primary purpose is not just to generate financial returns to your investors, but it's to keep your mission going. Something really important. You mentioned networking there, Tom. Can you talk a bit more about, I had a lot of questions from the audience around networking. How can you build that up if you don't currently have one, particularly when it comes to investors, but also just, as you say, lawyers, people that are helpful. Any sort of suggestions or tips? And then I'll go to Laura around networking with investors.
I mean, I guess I was lucky at that time. I was living in London, and so as a result of that, there's a lot of events happening all of the time. And one of the things that was particularly helpful was that Bethnal Green Ventures were running their Worker Tech nights. And that was the main thing that I was turning up to and taking part in and talking to people. And so what I effectively was trying to do was find events and things that were aligned to the problem that we were trying to solve, and then talking about how our solution was different from other things. And we were just chatting with other people. So I just made a list of all the stuff that was going on that was in that space around kind of technologies relating to education, technologies relating to specifically about adult education as well, which that's wasn't turning up to stuff about schools really. I managed to, as a result of that, I managed to kind of chat with the team at GovStart, who were doing the public team, who were doing lots of work of helping startups work with government. So as a result of that, I ended up going to all sorts of different conversations with MPs and stuff like that. And it was just like all random kind of things that happened. But that was the first thing, was just getting the list together of places to go. With the kind of connections into Bates Wells, that was me being a bit belligerent with Social Enterprise UK, because initially they weren't being that helpful, because we just started and didn't have anything of particular note. But I just kind of kept on really, and I kept asking if there were other things that we could be doing that would be able to help kind of really make sure that we were able to say that we were a social enterprise, right? Because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to demonstrate that was the case. So yeah, and as a result of that, went and chatted to our Unlimited team, got turned down for grants, got turned down for lots of different things, and then every conversation was always just a way of me trying to understand more about what was going on and where we fitted, and trying to be just trying to be really open to the different things that were happening in the environment. If I was living where I'm living now, I definitely would found it a lot harder, for sure, to be able to get that. As at that time, it was really fortunate that that's where I happened to be.
Yeah, I think you're recognizing that. I mean, you were in London, and the value that brings. We're not saying that it's impossible to fundraise outside London there, but there are increasingly lots of regional hubs. You've got a lot of banks like NatWest and Barclays have all these labs that are all over, particularly the UK. So also good to have a look at it on a regional basis. But yeah,
Markets are really helpful for sure. They've been really helpful with kind of connecting with smaller business owners as well, and understanding more about the challenges in different areas. It's definitely not just about London. I guess the thing that what I didn't have at that point was any type of real network, right? So it was just you know, wherever you are, it's trying to figure out how to take part in a community that's either, and now that we do so much of our work remotely, maybe it would be easier than what I'm thinking. And certainly, obviously, Esme, you weren't around doing Consider that time. And so this is a great community for trying to help people understand the options and the resources that are out there, because it's so confusing, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to just type into Google easily and say, how do I amend my articles of association? You could, but I mean, you know, you might not get the outcome you're hoping for.
Yeah, or you might not get it so fast. Yeah, I think, you know, networking is believing that you can make those connections, and, you know, trying to show up again and again in whichever place you feel comfortable. If you're not comfortable in person, you can always do it online. You don't need to be in person all the time. But I wanted to go to Laura and your experiences around networking and speaking with angel investors.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I'm really lucky. I am in London, which has made it easier. But I think of the kind of 6 to 9 months of fundraising I've been doing, I think the vast majority of that has been networking. And it's not always, I mean, the advice I'd give is that it's not always the obvious networking. And so, yes, there's the sort of founder investor events that are run, but actually, you know, I just blitzed everything. And so, you know, it might be, you know, we went to a sustainability show that was a consumer focused show. So, you know, in theory, it was all about us selling product to consumers. But I just happened to meet someone there who was really interested in us. I hadn't realised, but she was doing an internship, about to do an internship at a family office. And then she came back to me and said, actually, I'd like to intro you to the family office. So I'd say pretty much every single event you go to, whether it's an obvious investor event or not, try and meet, you know, the kind of most interesting people in the room that you think are going to be networked. And sort of a lot of the time that was actually fellow founders. So, you know, often if you're in a sort of mission driven business, actually founders are very open and transparent and helpful with sharing their investors, and will say, yes, this is my investor, they might be interested, or, you know, so I'd say that every single event, you know, you know, I'm a mum, and so I've been to school events and actually have met incredible people. So I just say it's not always the most obvious events. So go to as many as you can and figure out very quickly if there are some people there that can help you. And I think it took me a while to realize if people don't know that I'm fundraising, they might not, how are they supposed to know? They can't magically know. And so actually what I then started doing was always drop it in, you know, whenever they'd say, oh, you know, who are you? What do you do? And I'd be like, oh, I'm running a, you know, a sustainable cleaning accessory business. And we're, you know, I'm in the middle of a fundraise. And so like immediately, if someone is interested or, you know, or can connect you, you've already signaled that that's what you're interested in. And so I think that took me surprisingly a long time to figure out. And so and then I think the third thing, so go to as many events. It's not always the obvious ones. Second one is tell people what you're looking for. And then the third one is have all of your documents ready to go. So, you know, what I found, and I think I was quite slow at the beginning, you know, I'd have maybe a really good intro. It would take me a few days to get back to them. My legal documents weren't really ready to go, but I think you've got to hit, you know, as soon as you've made a good connection that night or latest the next morning, follow up with an email, find out if they're genuinely interested or they've just had a few beers. You know, so I think and then it becomes a bit of a, you know, it's then a sort of well-oiled machine and process, and sort of track all of your network. I think mapping it out is a really good idea, and putting it all into kind of a Google sheet or a spreadsheet is a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Like you'd be I think you'd be very surprised around who actually angel invests. Like I'm in an angel syndicate, who are mainly women, and their backgrounds are so varied, you know, corporate jobs, like, you know, like founders, like lawyers, all sorts of people, and you'd be extremely surprised that they're interested in it. And until you ask, you simply do not know. And
I'd say that, yeah, and I'd say that for those that don't live in London, there are a lot of very active regional angel groups. And I think often there's a few sort of pivotal people in those angel groups who can then provide and sort of, you know, so trying to understand how does the network around my local regional area work. I think that's another good way of doing it.
Yeah. I came across one the other day that was called Angels of the North, which I thought was quite a fun name. I feel like they definitely watched Game of Thrones. But wherever you are in the world, right? Like, I know that it's quite UK focused today, but this advice applies anywhere. Have a look at what's happening in your regional areas, and not just in these big cities. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in rural areas as well to support businesses. I have one more question for you, Laura, and then I'm going to get this question from Caitlin. Were you looking for sort of impact angels, or just sort of angels that were perhaps interested in you, and as a side point, you have impact within your business?
I think it all depends on where you are in the investment journey. I mean, I'd love to say that I only wanted to bring in impact focused angels on board, or VCs that were super well aligned. I think I realized fairly early on this equity fundraise that the market was changing very quickly, that consumer products and premium consumer products in particular were taking a really big hit, and not very many people were investing. So, you know, I definitely have a mix of people that are interested in impact. You know, I've tried to bring in people that are, you know, have very good consumer knowledge, and particularly for my industry. So I think, you know, I asked myself, you know, what can this angel bring, especially if they are below, you know, typically you set a sort of minimum ticket amount, you know, below which you won't take the investment. But, you know, in many cases, you know, if I could see that they were going to bring their own connections and know-how, then I'd accept that. And then honestly, then, you know, quite often with an equity fundraise, you need to get to a threshold, right? As soon as you can say, oh, I am 50% or 60% funded, that creates a bit of a head of steam and a bit of momentum. And then you can, so, you know, I think in this climate, I would do whatever you can, as long as the, you know, they don't have a completely different set of ethics, and you can flush that out during the process. But I think the reality is, you know, if someone wanted to invest and they were broadly on the right, you know, on the same page as me ethically, then I accepted the investment. You know, maybe in a future round when when the investment climate is, you know, much more in the kind of founders' favor, I think, you know, ideally I would be much pickier, but I think that's a kind of bit of a luxury right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult climate right now, and you did it, so fantastic. All right, I got a question from Caitlin. All right, it's to all the panel. Historically, there's been a lot of noise around the fact that founders should quit their jobs and go all in, but we physically wouldn't be able to survive the cost of living crisis if we did. Has anyone got any tips around bootstrapping whilst working part-time? And secondly, has anyone heard about changing investor attitudes to founders working in jobs in this difficult economic climate? I'm gonna go for Hermione as the main bootstrapper here.
Yeah, I've got some points on some of the other questions too I'd love to add to.
Please
but
do.
Firstly, on that one, Caitlin, I would say, you know, I had that period where I was for a few years working. I was when I started Do Nation, I took exactly the advice you're saying, that like, right, you need to go all in. And I think there is a lot of truth in that. If you're not all in, you can't, the momentum slows and it can take a long time. But equally, if the market isn't fully there, and if you're not ready to really scale it and can't physically, you know, survive without the revenue, if you're not able to pay yourself through the business, then you're going to need to take work elsewhere. I guess trying to find work that's as flexible as possible. When I did that, I was consulting or kind of contracting, so I had complete control over the hours that I did for the other paid work, which was really valuable, because, you know, if a donation customer came along and wanted a call, I was able to respond to it, boom, quick. I think that's really important. If obviously it's can be a luxury and it depends on your business style, but trying to retain as much flexibility so that it doesn't kill momentum, because momentum is one of the most important things in getting a business off the ground. I don't know about investor attitudes because we weren't fundraising during that period, so I'm afraid I can't talk to that. In terms of, there's a couple of the other points I just wanted to add to when it comes to structure, that first question. We're a social enterprise, we're also a certified B Corp, and actually, while it's not perhaps such as an extreme restructure, it does, becoming a B Corp does require you to change your articles of association to embed the environmental and social kind of mission lock in there. And that is a global organization. Like there are B labs in different continents all around the world, so that might be a good place to look for advice on kind of, I know there's different requirements in different countries for how you meet the restructuring requirements of B Corp. So they might be a good source of global info. Don't know where you're based. For us, and we'd actually done that restructure, like we'd embedded that into our articles before we became a B Corp, which was helpful. And actually the added benefit of that, kind of echoing what Dominic said, was it meant that we were then able to be classed as a recipient of 1% for the planet. 1% for planet is a movement that lots of businesses have signed up to commit to giving 1% of their revenue to environmental charities, but they were experimenting with social enterprises, and because we had that in our articles, now any customer that signs up to us that is a member of 1%, their subscription fees to donation count as part of that, which is a really nice benefit. And on the networking, couldn't agree more. I'm actually based in the mountains in France. So in many ways, like as far from networking events as possible. But actually there are a lot of other founders out there where I live, and talking to them about the fundraise, I think I've had 3 or 4 good intros to investors, and 2 that have come, 2 of our main investors have come from people I've met in Chamonix where I'm based. So don't let not being in London hold you back. I was talking the other day to another founder who is fundraising, still got and running a very similar product to us, but earlier stage, and he's still open. He's based in Slovenia, and he's done it all remotely. He hasn't traveled back to the UK once, but he was very generous in sharing some of his angel contacts who he thought, they weren't quite right for him, but because they didn't have a tried and tested product, but maybe they're right for you. So talking to other founders, I couldn't agree with more. And customers as well. If you've got customers who love what you do, and depends on the sector you're in. I have friends who work in the fintech sector, their customers are more likely to be angel investors than those working in the environmental sector. But yeah, tracking was the other point. You said use a spreadsheet. I actually had been using a kind of a database that wasn't what I usually use for tracking leads. I then switched recently to using Pipedrive, which is our sales software. And I have set up a separate pipeline in Pipedrive, which is what we use day to day. I know inside out, and it has totally transformed how I've approached. It's just the same. It's a pipeline of investors. Anyway, okay, that's sorry. That's
all wonderful
to add to.
That's all fantastic. I'm nodding along. I'm just trying to get a link to Pipedrive. I've tried to put in all of the links of anything anyone's mentioned. So please, before you go, have a look through the chat. If there's any links that you want, please take them. We are at time, so that went so fast. But thank you so much for everyone for joining. Thank you to our wonderful founders for sharing these honest stories. If you want to carry on that conversation, if you want help with your funding journey, we have our alternative funding school that starts in the summer, and we are currently open. Our super early bird ticket is open this week. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. Have a wonderful rest of the day. If it's your morning, have a great morning, and see you somewhere. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.
Good luck.